I'm Haley Sterling, 28. Standing center stage at our family's founders' gala. Champagne flute in hand. Tonight is supposed to be a celebration of our legacy. The cameras are flashing. The board is watching. I have a special surprise for my big sister. Sierra announces into the microphone. Her smile dazzling. I grip my glass. Smiling back. Ready for the photo op. I had no idea that the gift-wrapped box in her hands wasn't a present. It was a weapon designed to end my life. The humidity in Savannah usually makes the air feel heavy. But inside the Sterling Hotel's ballroom, the atmosphere was suffocating for a different reason. My sister, Sierra, tapped her champagne glass, silencing the board of directors. She handed me a gift-wrapped box with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Inside was a DNA test. Maybe this explains why you've always been the glitch in our perfect family, she announced. The room erupted in nervous laughter. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I just froze, not in shame, but in cold, hard calculation. Before I tell you whose name was actually on that birth certificate and who ended up owning this entire hotel by the end of the night, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to see how far the truth travels. Most people would have shattered. In a room full of 200 of Savannah's elite, having your own sister hand you a genetic eviction notice is the kind of social trauma that usually ends in tears or a scene. I did neither. I simply looked at the box. Then at Sierra. And finally, at my mother, Susan, who was nervously sipping her champagne and studying the floral arrangements as if they were suddenly the most fascinating things on earth. I didn't feel humiliation. I felt clarity. It was like looking at a balance sheet that finally made sense after years of missing variables. Thank you for the data, I said. My voice was level, devoid of the tremor Sierra had clearly been hoping for. The disappointment in her eyes was the only satisfaction I took from the moment. I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom, past the whispering investors and the shocked board members. I didn't run. I didn't speed. I walked with the measured pace of someone who had just closed a file. I didn't drive home to my apartment. I drove straight to the Sterling corporate headquarters. The building was empty at 11 at night. A monolith of glass and steel that felt more like home than the estate ever had. I swiped my badge and took the elevator to the 24th floor. My office was dark, illuminated only by the city lights below. This was my domain. I am a forensic auditor. My entire career is built on the premise that people lie. But numbers don't. I track embezzlement. I find hidden assets. And I reconstruct the truth from the debris of financial ruin. My family always thought I was boring. The quiet sister, who liked math more than parties. They never realized that I was dangerous. I sat at my desk and placed the DNA kit on the polished mahogany. It was a variable I hadn't accounted for. But now that it was here, I could process it. My father, Douglas, had died 6 months ago. He was the only person in that house who had ever looked at me with anything other than mild annoyance. He was a hard man, silent and exacting. But he had taught me how to read a ledger before I could ride a bike. He had taught me that affection was a liability, but loyalty was an asset. I swiveled my chair to the credenza behind me. Hidden behind a false panel was a biometric safe. Douglas had installed it himself 3 years ago. Shortly after his first heart attack, he had registered my fingerprint and given me a simple instruction: when the sharks circle, open this. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now, I realized he was being predictive. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. The mechanism whirred. A sound loud in the silence of the office. The heavy steel door clicked open. My heart rate didn't spike. I wasn't looking for comfort or a letter from the grave telling me he loved me. I was looking for leverage. I was looking for the contingency plan he had promised. Because Douglas Sterling never entered a negotiation he hadn't already won. And he certainly wouldn't have left his company or me unprotected. I reached into the darkness of the steel box. My hand closed around the cool leather spine of a notebook. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a deed. It was a simple, bound ledger. I pulled it out and set it under the desk lamp. This was it. The weapon I needed to survive the war my sister had just declared. I took a breath. Not deep. Just necessary. And opened the cover. The ledger smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. A sensory ghost of the father I thought I knew. I opened it to the first page, expecting a log of business assets or hidden accounts. Instead, I found a timeline of my life, written in Douglas's sharp, architectural scrawl. It wasn't a financial record, it was a character audit. The columns were labeled simply, liability and asset. I ran my finger down the first few entries. October 4th, 2014. Debit, $15,000. Legal retainer for Sierra's DUI. Note reckless. No remorse. I remembered that night. Sierra had crashed her convertible into a neighbor's fence. Susan had told everyone it was a mechanical failure. Douglas knew better. He had paid for the silence. But he had recorded the cost. I turned the page. May 20th, 2016. Credit. Full academic scholarship. Haley. Value $100. $60,000 saved. Note, high yield. Self-sufficient. My breath hitched. For 28 years, I had believed Douglas looked at me with indifference, while he showered Sierra with affection. I thought I was the invisible daughter. The one who had to work twice as hard to be noticed. But this book told a different story. He hadn't been ignoring me. He had been accounting for me. He was tracking the return on investment of his children's souls. Every time Sierra demanded a bailout, he logged it as a loss. Every time I achieved something on my own, he logged it as a gain. I flipped to the middle of the book, searching for the variable that had started this entire war. I found it on a page dated 3 weeks after my 12th birthday. The ink was darker here. The pen pressed harder into the paper. July 10th, 2005. Private investigation results. DNA confirmation negative. Biological father Samuel Vance. Note, Susan's infidelity, confirmed. I stared at the words until they blurred. He knew. He had known for 16 years. He knew I wasn't his blood before I even finished middle school. I waited for the anger, for the feeling of betrayal. But it didn't come. Instead, I read the line directly beneath it. Decision: retain Haley. Discard the secret. She is the only one in this house who understands the value of $1 and the weight of a promise. Blood is biology. Loyalty is currency. She is my heir. I closed the book. The leather cool against my palms. The silence in my office felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with vindication. Sierra thought she had handed me a death sentence with that DNA kit. She thought exposing my parentage would strip me of my identity and my inheritance. She didn't understand that Douglas Sterling didn't care about DNA. He cared about competence. He hadn't left me the company because he was tricked. He hadn't left it to me because he loved me like a traditional father loves a daughter. He left it to me because he respected me. In his eyes, Sierra was a bad investment. A liability that kept bleeding capital. I was the asset that kept the ledger balanced. I stood up and walked to the window. Looking out over the city of Savannah, my reflection stared back, ghostly against the glass. I wasn't just an auditor anymore. I was the evidence. I unlocked my phone and dialed the number for the estate attorney. It was time to stop reacting to their narrative and start enforcing the audit. The results arrived via a secure email notification 3 weeks later. I didn't need to open the attachment to know the truth. But I did it for the sake of documentation. Probability of paternity: 99.9%. Alleged father Samuel Vance. I sat in the silence of my office, staring at the name. Samuel Vance. The angel investor who had saved the Sterling Hotel Group from bankruptcy 25 years ago. The silent partner who had always sent me birthday cards with savings bonds inside. Signed simply, S. V. I had always assumed he was just a generous eccentric. Now, I realized he was a father paying child support in the only way he could without destroying my mother's reputation. Sierra didn't wait for a family meeting. She didn't wait for legal counsel. She did what she always did. She went to the court of public opinion. At 2 p.m, my phone lit up with alerts. Sierra had posted a video to her 2 million followers. She was crying, perfectly lit. Of course, holding the DNA results I had supposedly hidden. The caption read, "The ultimate betrayal. My sister isn't even a Sterling. She's a fraud who's been squatting on my inheritance." 10 minutes later, my mother called. "You need to step down," Susan said. There was no greeting. No apology for the fact that her infidelity was now trending on Twitter. Just the cold, clipped tone of a woman managing a PR crisis. "The board is panicked. The stock is wobbling. You are a liability. Haley, resign. And we can say it was for health reasons." I leaned back in my chair, swiveling to look at the city skyline. For years, I had analyzed our dynamic, trying to solve for X. Why did she love Sierra, who was vapid and cruel, but despise me, who kept her secrets and fixed her mistakes? I used to think it was because I wasn't pretty enough, or charming enough. But as I listened to her demand my resignation to save her own face, the equation finally resolved. It wasn't about love. It was about reflection. Sierra was the golden child because she was a mirror that reflected Susan's vanity. When Susan looked at Sierra, she saw the beauty and status she believed she deserved. Sierra was the painted portrait in the attic that stayed young while the reality rotted. I was the scapegoat because I was the mirror that reflected her shame. When Susan looked at me, she didn't see a daughter. She saw the infidelity. She saw the competence she lacked. She saw the witness to her crimes. I was the high-definition security footage she couldn't delete. She didn't hate me. She hated the reflection. And a narcissist will always try to break the mirror that shows them their own ugly truth. "I'm not resigning, Mother," I said, my voice calm. "And I suggest you tell Sierra to stop posting. Because if we're going to talk about fraud, we're going to talk about all of it." "Is that a threat?" she hissed. "It's a forecast," I replied. "I'll see you at the quarterly meeting." I hung up. The grief I expected to feel was absent. In its place was a cold, steel resolve. They wanted to use biology to disqualify me. Fine. I would use the law to dismantle them. I opened the Sterling Hotel Group's bylaws and began to read. 3 months is a long time in the corporate world. It is a fiscal quarter. It is enough time to hide assets. Or if you are arrogant, in enough time to spend money you don't have yet. Sierra used the time to plan her victory lap. She demanded an urgent estate meeting to formalize my removal from the family trust based on the biological discrepancies she had uncovered. She chose the main boardroom at the Sterling headquarters for the execution. It was a power move, designed to humiliate me in the very building where I worked. I walked into the boardroom at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. The air conditioning was humming. A low, expensive drone that usually signaled business as usual. Today, it signaled a slaughter. Sierra sat at the head of the table, dressed in a white power suit that cost more than my first car. Susan sat to her right, looking less triumphant and more exhausted, her eyes darting between the door and her phone. They had brought the family's longtime attorney, a man named Reynolds, who looked like he would rather be undergoing a root canal than refereeing this meeting. I didn't come alone. I brought my own counsel. A shark of a woman named Patel, who specialized in corporate litigation. And I brought a heavy, expanding file folder. I didn't sit at the foot of the table. I took the seat directly opposite Sierra. "Let's get this over with," Sierra said, checking her watch. "I have a brand partnership lunch at noon. Reynolds. Read the clause about lineal descendants so we can cut the check, and Haley can clear out her desk." Reynolds cleared his throat. shuffling papers. He looked at me. Then at Sierra. Actually, Ms. Sterling, before we address the trust distribution, there is the matter of the final addendums to Douglas's will, and the matter of the secondary estate. Secondary estate? Susan asked, her voice sharp. Douglas didn't have a secondary estate. No, Reynolds said, his eyes sliding to me. But Samuel Vance did. The name drained the room of air. Susan went rigid, gripping her glass. Sierra looked baffled. She didn't know that the man who saved our family business decades ago was the same man whose DNA she later used to try to ruin me. What does the angel investor have to do with us? Sierra snapped. He died last year. We are focusing, I said calmly. Reynolds, play the video. The curtains closed. The screen dropped. And Douglas Sterling appeared frail. Recorded 2 weeks before his death. But his eyes still sharp. If you're watching this, Douglas said, it means Sierra has made her move. I expected it. I knew Haley's parentage from the day she was born. Susan, you get the operating company. Susan exhaled. Thinking she'd won. She didn't understand it carried debt and liabilities. Douglas continued. But the holding company land, buildings, intellectual property goes entirely to Haley. Sierra shot to her feet. That's not fair. Sit down, I said. The video faded. Reynolds lifted a sealed document. Regarding the estate of Samuel Vance, he leaves his full investment portfolio and his 51% controlling interest in the Sterling Hotel Group to his biological daughter, Haley. The numbers landed hard. Douglas gave me the assets. Samuel gave me control. I didn't just earn a seat at the table. I owned it. Sierra turned to Susan in panic. Mom, do something. Susan only stared at me. She isn't a stranger, she whispered. She's the boss. Correct, I said, placing a file in front of Sierra. This is your financial review. She recoiled. This is fraud. You're jealous. Douglas valued competence. Samuel valued return. You offer neither. I wrote figures on the whiteboard. $125. 0 inches. Fake marketing expenses. $450. 0 inches misused loans. Personal trips. Designer clothes. A Bali spa retreat. A Porsche. A boyfriend's failing record label. Embezzlement. Callable loans. Total liability, $575. 000 felony territory. Susan tried to soften it. She's your sister. We can arrange payments. A payment plan requires income. As of this morning, Sierra is terminated for cause. I slid a single page to her. Sign over your equity. Liquidate your assets. Resign from the board. Do that. And this stays internal. Tears streaked her face. If I sign, I'll have nothing. You'll have your freedom, I said. More than you offered me when you tried to steal my identity. I closed my folder. You have 24 hours. If the money isn't returned by close of business tomorrow, I take this to the district attorney. I walked out, leaving them alone with the cold light of the projector and the wreckage of their own choices.